Spencer, and I'm part of the, I guess you could say, retired faculty staff committee that's looking at the Plymouth's 150th anniversary. And today I'm here to interview Robert Miller. And Robert or Bob, we'll start with a question. When did you arrive in Plymouth, and what department were you associated with?
Well, I arrived in Plymouth in 1976 as a member of the psychology department.
And what kind of courses were you teaching? And what was
I was hired for a position in social learning. It was defined as, I had a background in social development, and I was brought here to teach social psychology and a learning course, which was a challenge for me. Fortunately, at that time, we didn't have an animal lab, or I wouldn't have been able to do it. And general psychology, as I recall, and developmental psychology. So those were the kinds of things I taught to begin with in the psychology department.
And what was your impression of the town of Plymouth when you first arrived?
I was very happy with the town of Plymouth. I had always lived in New England, except the previous 2 years when I had a position at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. And I was very happy to get back to New England, and I was really happy to be in a small New Hampshire town. So my impression was very positive.
And what was your impression of the students that you had in 76?
I loved the students. It was a very positive impression. They were eager to learn. The psychology majors were mostly eager to go into the helping professions. They were kind, lovely people.
And did you have anybody sort of that mentored you when you first got here? Sort of introduced you to the campus, or introduced you to the town? Or?
Well, at that point, Plymouth had a Big Brother program, where if you were a new male faculty member, you were assigned a somewhat slightly older male faculty member as your big brother. Mine was Ken Huser in the education department. I don't think he sent me a note and informed me of that. Other than that, I don't think I met him for about a year.
Not much better.
But I already had one close friend in the psychology department, Stephen Weissman. We had been to graduate school together.
Okay, right.
And he had kind of engineered me getting this job.
Okay.
And so, so he certainly mentored me. He'd been here for 2 years. But the other senior members of the psychology department who had a very positive influence on me were Boyce Ford and Dick Wimsatt, who was chair of the department
Dick was
at that
chair
time.
at that time, because I know Boyce had been chair at some time.
He was chair later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dick had been the founding chair of the psychology department, and I'm not sure. Maybe the psychology department had existed for 10 years at that point. It broke off from the education department, I believe.
Right. And were you in Harold Hyde Hall, or were you?
I arrived the same year that Hyde Hall opened, and when I interviewed, psychology was still in the upstairs of Ellen Reed House,
right.
And they shared it with English, and Hyde Hall opened the same time I arrived. In fact, I had no office for the summer because the building wasn't available yet, and it was available right at the last minute.
Because I know when I came in '67, we shared some space with psychology.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I don't think we didn't share any faculty office space, but classes and what have you were in Boyd Hall. And I don't know whether you had an office there, whether the department office was there or not.
I think it was in Ellen Reed House.
Probably so, yeah, right across the street. So, so how has your impression of students changed from when you came in '76 to when you retired?
However the impression changed, it changed slowly. So I don't know that I would say that I saw them being too different at the end. I changed departments, so I was teaching a different population in the second half of my career. I was in psychology for 20 years, and then I was Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies for 3 years, and then I went into the Education Department and taught at first both undergraduates and graduate students. Comparing the education majors and the psychology majors, the education majors were somewhat more diligent and somewhat more reliable about doing their assignments and so on. Near the end of my career, the students became somewhat different because of their preoccupation with technology. And by the very end of my career, I was stayed for 17 years in the education department. I felt a lot of them were kind of leading their lives online, and one of the reasons I was ready to retire was that I didn't feel that I related to the students as well as I had in even 5 years earlier.
So, now, in the time that you've been here, what, 37 years or something like that?
It was 40 years.
40 years. Can you look back and see any students that you might have mentored that you've maintained connections with?
Oh yes, there are a number of those.
And what have some of those students done? Some of their achievements.
Well, I had several psychology major students who went on and got doctoral degrees. One who I still see regularly is a psychotherapist in Boston. Another one who I hear from at Christmas at least, but haven't seen for many years. Got a doctoral degree in psychology, but then didn't really use the psychology part of it. She used the statistics that she had to learn really well, and is some kind of a statistician and has run her own companies. And she's highly successful. I don't quite understand what she does. And there's another one who I'm still in touch with, who got a doctoral in psychology and is now a psychology professor at some days I can remember the name of the college in Pennsylvania, but this isn't one of those days. Yeah. So those are 3 examples. And then other people have just done a variety of things.
Right. So, and I assume you've been keeping in contact with many of the people that you've known.
Quite a few. Yeah. Not as many as some people do.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about Plymouth being a small school is
Yeah.
that you get to know the students very
That's
well
true.
while they're here.
Yep.
So, what are your impressions of the changes in the town from when you came? Now, 76, the state went all the way through, but...
Yes, it did. I don't think it had been there a whole long time, but I mean, the town obviously has grown a lot, particularly the Tenny Mountain area. I think Hatch Plaza was sort of new when I arrived, and there was nothing else out there but that at that point. So all of that is new. The university has continued to expand a bit.
What was the campus like when you came? I mean, did the road, I think the road still went through the middle of campus.
Oh yeah, oh yes, it was very much that way. They had just the year before, I think, moved the public schools off of the campus, and they were using Memorial. I think they had renovated Spear already, but Memorial hadn't been renovated. It looked like an elementary school, but the classrooms were being used. I taught in Memorial. The high school was still standing, but it was boarded up and closed, and it was torn down the first year I was there. So there wasn't that green in the center of the campus. I've lost track of your question now.
Well, I mean, we really have a campus now.
Oh yes, that was your question. Yes, I still remember when the consultants came to study the campus and said, you've managed to create an urban campus in this environment. It's all roads and parking lots.
Right.
And after that, the big changes were made and the roads were closed and so on.
Right. And, you know, the other thing, you know, I forget what year it was done when they redid Silver Hall. They actually made an entrance
Yes.
that went to the campus.
Yes,
You know,
that's right.
otherwise You'd have to go all the way down
Right.
the street to get in there.
Right, yes.
Was there anything, you know, about your experience that made you think that you made the right decision to come to Plymouth?
I never questioned that decision.
Okay.
This was exactly the kind of place I wanted to be at. I always knew, even before I went to graduate school, that what I was interested in doing was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason Plymouth was such a good fit for me at first was because the emphasis was so strongly on teaching. As I recall, we were expected to spend 80% of our time on teaching and maybe 10% on service and 10% on scholarship.
Right.
I managed to continue to do that even after emphases changed somewhat. Eventually, what scholarship I did was about writing and teaching writing rather than about psychology. And I did discover I enjoyed service, and I did a lot of service.
A lot of committees and what have you.
Yeah, but I was primarily interested in teaching, and other people would look for opportunities to get release time from teaching, and I regarded it as a punishment. When I became chair of the psychology department and I was supposed to have 2 courses release time, I told them I would only do it if I only had to have 1 course release time. And then there was no such thing as overload pay.
Right,
so I was just teaching the extra course because I wanted to teach the extra course.
Right.
Plymouth was always a really good fit for me, and I'm not sure this is true of many people, but what I really valued about it was that Plymouth allowed me to develop and change. I redefined myself several different times. When I changed,
reinvent yourself.
yeah, I kept reinventing myself. Fairly early on, I got really interested in advising, and I became director of the advising center, and I was doing that. And then I had always been really interested in using writing as a teaching tool, and suddenly the nation found out about that and invented writing across the curriculum. And I was already doing all of that stuff, and I eventually became coordinator of the Writing Across the Curriculum program, and that led to me working in the Writing Center, and it led to me being allowed to teach in the English department. I've also taught part-time in the English department in my later years, composition and the Gen Ed writing course. And then when I went into the education department, at first that wasn't a big switch from psychology, because I was brought there to teach the same things I'd been teaching in psychology development to the undergraduates and research methods to the graduate students. But then I got an opportunity to take over the course on philosophy and history of education that Chris Clark had taught for many years. And when he retired, they let me be his replacement and for that. And I never had any graduate training in that subject matter. I was relying on my undergraduate courses in philosophy and history. And I did sit in on Chris's graduate version of that course for a whole year before I taught it. So I learned some of it from him. But so at the end of my career, that's all I was teaching. And I was really had become a philosophy teacher. So I really,
coming in as a psychologist.
Yeah, that's right.
As a philosopher.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I could have done that anywhere. And I would hope maybe people could do it now. I think the the promise of this new cluster business is that it seems to me it would allow faculty opportunities for that kind of thing. I've always really valued interdisciplinary, and I did a lot of interdisciplinary teaching too in my years here, and team teaching.
Well, being in the biology group, I
Yeah.
guess, and later on in the biology department, we always had a good relationship with the psychology.
Sure.
We had many psychology majors that came over
Yes.
to K&B and some of the
Right.
other courses that we teach. Well, you mentioned that you spent 3 years as Dean of Undergraduate
I did.
Studies. That seems like quite a switch from being in the classroom. What was your...
Well, it was, although I continued to teach one course. Again, I wouldn't do that unless they let me teach one course a semester.
what was the reason that you thought you...
Well, that came out of my work in advising.
Okay.
I had run, for a while, we had an advising center that
Right.
wasn't very successful, but I was responsible for it. And that had led me to have a very close relationship with Mary Campbell in the undergraduate studies office, and really with all the people that preceded me as associate dean. Back then, people were drawn out of the faculty for 3-year terms to do that job. And I sort of felt in part an obligation to take a turn. Right, I wouldn't have been interested in doing it forever. I found it rewarding. I enjoyed the work I got to do with working with students with problems, and the work I got to do on the curriculum and the general ed program in that role.
Because I was going to say, my impression sometimes of the Dean of Undergraduate Studies is dealing with student problems.
Yes, it is. Well, and that's really what it is, and that's the most satisfying part of the job. The difficult part of that job back then was all the meetings I had to go to. I hate meetings. But I liked the face-to-face stuff with the students, and I had a wonderful staff. Mary Campbell and Deb Tobine were both in the office with me.
Right. And that was just for 3 years,
yes.
Right? So that was,
yep.
It seems like maybe the psychology department has the option on that, because isn't Dave...
Yeah, that's right. It's the position that evolved into what David Zaire has now.
Right. And it doesn't seem like it flows anymore out.
No, they actually, I think, I kind of shared with people the challenges of that job when I did it. I won't use the word whining, but I might have been accused of that. The result was, when my term was up, they couldn't get anyone on the faculty to apply for the job. There had only been 2 of us when I got the job. So they then brought in someone from off campus for a year or 2, and she didn't work out, and then they went back to the faculty, and that may be when David came in. I can't remember whether someone else in between.
Who was like I guess we had a dean at that time rather than a provost.
It was still. It was still dean of the faculty or dean of the college. Right. I worked for Robin Bowers when I did it.
So, and
Robin was dean, and Wharton was president. Yeah.
And what was your relationship with Robin and Wharton?
I had a very positive relationship with Robin. It worked very well for me in that he left me alone and let me do whatever I wanted, pretty much. But he always supported me if there were a conflict, and he was always there. And I can't remember what my relationship with Wharton was when I was associate dean. I later had a more positive relationship with him.
Because it seemed like Don didn't do a lot with academics. He did more with...
Yeah, I don't remember him being very, very involved. Yeah.
More or less with the university system and the trustees.
Yeah.
Well, as we've been talking about some of these things, we've talked about some of the things that you've done. What do you think might have been major contributions to the progress of Plymouth as an institution, what would you put on your list? And how would you maybe prioritize, you know, being maybe the professor in psychology is number one, or you know, what do you think have been some of your important contributions?
I don't know. I mean, I would certainly put all of the teaching first, and then I would put probably my work with the writing across the curriculum program.
And I assume you saw students one-on-one on that, and you could see improvements in terms of their writing?
Yeah, well, other coordinators hadn't done this, but I wanted to find out what went on in the writing center, so I started working there, you know, 4 or 5 hours a week, and I loved that work, and I did it at the time I was writing cross-curriculum coordinator, and then late in my career I returned to the job in the last 5 or 6 years that I was on the faculty, even when I was half-time, the last 4 years of my tenure here. That's what I did for my service. I worked at the Writing Center. So I had a lot of student contact with that. I think my other primary accomplishments probably were in the area of general education. I was on the committee that produced what we used to call
led by Sally Bowen, you mean? Or not? Because I know
I think Sally was the previous one.
Oh, okay.
There were 3. I guess the one that I helped create is the one that's still in effect, although it's been modified somewhat, but it's never been completely revamped. So it was that one. That was kind of an interesting experience. The committee had been working for several years on this model, and they kept bringing it to the faculty. And I complained so much about everything they were doing and asked so many questions that finally Ginny Barry appointed me to the committee for the last year, Kathy LeBlanc and I. And we got it done. And then, as you may recall, that was such a big change when that program went in that Ginny felt someone had to be taken out of the faculty to oversee its implementation, and I got that job. And again, I found myself with more release time than I wanted. I think I had 50% release time to work with each of the departments and figure out how they were going to do this. So that generally went well. So that would be on my list of things I think I've contributed.
And when you look at, you know, the university will have been around, you know, 150 years, not necessarily as a university. Is there any kind of suggestions you would offer to, I guess you could say, future faculty, future, you know, administrators that would be positive for our next 150 years as compared to our last?
I don't think I would presume to do that. Okay. The university's changed so much and times have changed so much. Anything I would say would sound like wanting to go back to the way it used to be. and I know that's not going to happen.
Right. Well, the other question I was going to ask you is, I mean, you've been working with the Writing Center for a long time.
Yes.
And I assume that probably when you first started, kids were probably typing their papers, or were they using word processing then?
I can't remember. Probably that. I mean, certainly when I started teaching, they were typing their papers. I can't remember whether
when you finished
we were word processing it.
All on the computer.
Yeah.
And do you think, this is such an interesting question, do you think having word processors and things like that have either facilitated better writing or have hampered better writing?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, I think probably on the whole the effects are positive on word processing, on writing. It certainly makes writing easier, and it it certainly creates less resistance to revision, which is so important in writing. The only negative parts of it that I would see in terms of its effects on writing is I think a lot of people can't spell anymore because they depend on the computer to do that for them and that kind of thing. But that's pretty trivial. I think the effects are positive.
On that because I can remember when they first started using Microsoft Word or some of the other word processors, they would still turn in the paper with errors, and I say, well, didn't you see that the word was in red?
Right.
Did that mean something to you?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean
right.
I could check my spelling that way?
Right.
I think it is interesting. I think, as you say, technology has become such an important aspect of a person's life.
Yeah.
I mean, I go someplace and you see people all on their cell phones.
Right.
You didn't see that a long time ago. So we're sort of getting near the end of our interview, and one of the questions that we always ask people is there something that we haven't talked about, so far that you think is important to bring up for people to know a little bit more about you, or know a little bit more about the town of Plymouth, or about your experience here at the institution?
Okay. I haven't yet had an opportunity to, you asked me about who mentored me when I first came, but there have been some people who were really important to me later in my career, and first among them would be Henry Vidham, who had more influence on me probably than anyone ever in my life as a teacher. And my association with Henry began when the general education program before the present one went into effect in '83 or '84 or '82. Around then, that's the one I think that Sally had to do with, and that was the one when integrative courses were introduced for the first time into the general education curriculum, and at that time, as they were originally conceived, they were supposed to be team taught by people from 2 different departments, and they were going to do a pilot program for that the year before it would go into effect for everyone, and they were looking for a few people to pilot those programs, and I was chair of the psychology department at that time, and Henry Vidham showed up at my office to see whether I knew of anyone in the psychology department who would like to collaborate with him and develop an integrative course on psychology and literature. And I was so frightened to do that I put him off for a few days, and then I said that I would do that. And I was frightened to do that because he was just such an awesome figure, and I was so lacking in confidence about my appreciation of literature and my ability to deal with literature. But we offered what turned out to be the first integrative course, because I think it was the only one in the pilot program. And that began a long collaboration with him. We taught the course once a year for the rest of his career until he retired, and then I kept it going with Mary Lou Hinman and then with Bonnie Breen Wagner. And then when Bonnie finally retired, we retired the course. I'd been through it with 3 people. But Henry taught me more about teaching than anyone else I know.
I know people that took his course just loved him.
Yeah, he was truly Socratic. The entire time he asked questions. That's what he did. I never saw him lecture, and it changed my whole approach to teaching. It made me much more student-centered than I had done before.
It sounds like we should have had more people working with Henry.
Yeah, that would have been good.
Face before that. I can remember. I thoroughly enjoyed that too. Dick Honeywell and Sally Bowman. I did a course called Perspectives on Wilderness. And we had money for the summer to get it ready. And that was a wonderful experience. And unfortunately, we only got to teach it team taught just one time.
Yeah, because they then figured out it was too expensive to get, but somehow Henry and I managed to keep doing it. And we did it in load every time.
Right.
But we were sort of an exception.
So you said you might have had somebody else other than Henry?
Well, I think Henry is the person I really particularly wanted to talk about. There are a number of other people, Sally Boland and so on, Meg Peterson. When I became writing cross-curriculum coordinator, I also wanted to find out what went on in the composition course.
Okay, that's what you had
And so I went to Roy Andrews, who was in the Writing Center, and Barbara Blahar, who was in the Writing Center, and Sally, I think. And I asked all of them I said I wanted to audit the composition course, and who were the best composition teachers. And Meg Peterson was a brand new person then, and she was the only one who was on everybody's list. So I went to Meg and I asked her if I could audit composition while I was, as one of my activities on a sabbatical I was about to have.
Okay.
And she looked at me and she said, "No, but you can take the course." So I took the course and I did all the assignments, even the collaborative writing assignment with these two undergraduates, one of whom was not a delight to work with. And that was a really, really important experience to me too, because she opened a world of writing to me, and she helped me figure out that I wanted to write fiction, and specifically I wanted to write plays. And I wrote the first scene of my first play as my final project in composition, I think.
Wow.
So she's another person that I would single out.
Well, we thank you very much for taking the time.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And we hope that people, 50 years from now might come back and see what.
Think of that. That's only a little horrifying.